So, Mike, I've been browsing the internet for some shelves, right?
As one does.
As one does. This is the thing I do in my spare time now. My house renovation's almost coming to an end. I've talked about it a bunch of this podcast. I hope listeners are on board. But I'm basically at the shelf stage. So I was looking around for some shelves, and naturally I ended up on eBay. And I thought, we haven't used eBay on Ctrl-Alt-Speech. So at least I don't think we have. So their prompt on eBay is search for anything.
Oh.
And you can take that as a kind of, material search, or you can think of it as a kind of philosophical prompt.
I was going to say there's a few different ways where you can search for a different government for the U.S., but I think I would like to search for more time. I feel like I don't have nearly enough time for anything.
Yeah.
As we were just discussing in terms of like how much stuff is going on. I could use more time. So if I could buy more time on eBay, I'd go with that.
Yeah, okay.
What about you?
Maybe a personal assistant.
Search for anything, Ben.
If I was to search for something, I would search for the kind of dying vestiges of a free speech platform. And, and that links to something that we'll talk about in today's podcast. So I'll explain more. Hello and welcome to Ctrl-Alt-Speech, your weekly roundup of the major stories about online speech, content moderation, and internet regulation. It's March the 20th, 2025, and this week's episode is brought to you with financial support from the Future of Online Trust and Safety Fund. This week, we're talking about AI Slop, the Online Safety Act coming into force, and Meta's attempt to build a better community notes than X. My name is Ben Whitelaw. I'm the founder and editor of Everything in Moderation, and I'm with a very time-poor Mike Masnick. How much would you pay, Mike, to have an extra hour every day?
Gosh, I don't know. That is a good question.
Just 1 hour?
Yeah, 1 hour is not enough. I think I need an extra day every week.
Yeah. Okay.
Where nothing happens, right? So I need everybody else can stick with the 7-day week, and I need that extra day when nothing is happening and it's just perfectly quiet and I can just catch up on stuff. I think that's what I would. Yeah, someone get me that. Someone get me that.
So you're paying for the whole world to stay still, essentially.
Yeah. No, I mean, in their lives, like they can just think that the world still has 7 days, but I want like this pause that I can still do stuff.
Yeah.
Give me that extra day. I'm not greedy.
No.
I don't need 2 days. Just one.
It reminds me of a children's TV show in the UK called Bernard's Watch.
Okay.
I don't know if you ever came across this.
No.
It's kind of unhinged, but I used to love it as a kid. Naturally, he had a kind of pocket watch, an old antique watch that he used to click and stop, and he went about his day-to-day life, and everyone else was frozen.
Yeah, that's it.
You want a Bernard's watch, don't you?
I think, yeah. I think there was a movie, like a Hollywood movie on that premise too, but I didn't see it. I remember the preview with that premise, but no, I just need that. But like, I wouldn't do anything nefarious. I would literally just sit and work, right? I mean, everyone makes fun of me for that. Like, all I do is work, but that would be, it would give me back regular time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I hope you don't think this is work. This is our time. This is your time to decompress, Mike.
There we go.
I think that's a sensible thing to buy. My purchase would be something very not sensible, and I was referring to it in the opening today. I want to buy the Twitter logo that's up for sale again. I don't know if you saw this. The big bird that used to sit outside of Twitter's office back when it was called Twitter in San Francisco has gone up for sale again, and it is the perfect analogy for what has happened to Twitter/X since it was bought by Elon Musk. So it was, I don't know if you remember, in 2023, Musk sold it as part of a kind of fire sale, like a kind of garage sale. Is that what you call it in the US? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And it sold for $100,000. It's currently up for sale now. And you just looked, right? And it was $2,700? $27,000.
$27,500.
Okay. So yeah, just as X's value plummeted over the last several years, although there's been some sort of correction this week, so has Larry Bird, the giant blue logo that used to sit outside the office in San Francisco. Maybe I could use it as a shelf.
Yeah, there you go. You take two birds with one stone.
Oh, would you look at that?
But yeah, I mean, I guess it's just been sitting in storage. They said it was in a storage facility in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And so you'll have to pay for shipping to the UK.
Yeah.
If you get it. But I will note that it says there's about 6 hours left as we record this. So by the time this comes out,
Yeah.
you may only have a few minutes left to bid on it and purchase it for Ben. In case any of our listeners want to make a donation to Ctrl-Alt-Speech,
Yeah.
and to Ben's shelving fund in particular, you can purchase the bird and send it off to London.
Yeah. You would get regular photos if you contribute.
Yeah. I wonder what your wife would feel about a giant bird showing up for your newly renovated home.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't love it. But, it's funny to see such a kind of old vestige of what Twitter used to be come up for sale again in such circumstances.
Yeah.
Cool. So purchasing power aside, our wish lists we've kind of dealt with today now, but we have a lot of stories that we want to get through. We have some really, I think, interesting kind of notable stories that we're going to talk through and explain, just as we always do on the podcast. Before we do, a request for some help from our listeners. We haven't had a review of the podcast since, I think, September 2024, Mike.
Yeah.
Isn't that tragic?
Yeah.
So if you don't hate listening to this podcast, let's mix it up a bit. If you don't hate listening to this podcast.
That's a very low bar you're setting there.
I know, but it might prompt people to think, actually, this is me. I'm somebody that doesn't hate this podcast. Maybe I'll spend some time helping Mike and Ben in their quest to have their podcast discovered across all of the platforms on which it is disseminated every week.
Yeah.
So if you don't hate it, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get the podcast, leave a little review. Doesn't need to be very long.
Yeah, exactly. And we look at the numbers and we've seen like our download numbers increase. So there's more of you. There's definitely some of you who weren't listening back in September of 2024.
Yeah.
So someone out there must be listening to this and thinking, I have not written a review for Ctrl-Alt-Speech, and I could, right?
Yeah.
Like, think positively. You can do it if you're listening to this and you haven't written a review.
And we'll give you a shout out in next week's podcast if you do. We won't shame you. There's no shame in submitting a review, but we'll give you a shout out. There is a risk, Mike, that some of our listeners perhaps are connected to our first story of this week.
Okay.
I'm hoping that every single download and listen is a real human person who works in the industry. There's a small chance there's a few AI-generated bots.
No.
That's how the internet works. I'm sorry to say it to you. And the first story from 404 Media really goes deep on this idea of AI slop and content being kind of created as a result of AI-generated systems and platforms. I got so deep into this. Explain what it is, why you picked it, and why it's important to our listeners.
Yeah, obviously 404 Media does such wonderful work, but this is such a wonderful story kind of laying out. Everybody's heard about, the rise of AI and AI slop, and 404, and in fact, has done a lot of reporting in general on AI slop and the fact that, social media, especially meta properties in particular, are sort of filling up with this stuff. And there's been this like confusion over why and how. But part of what's really interesting to me here is just like, not just how much it is getting filled up with just nonsense AI stuff, but the fact that there are these people, these content creators, who are basically saying like, we're fighting the algorithm and we're trying to figure out the best way to get the most click-throughs. And the best way to do that is take as many shots on goal as we possibly can. And AI will just generate a ton of stuff. We don't have to put work into it. You look at the really successful content creators like Mr. Beast or whatever, who spends millions of dollars on every video and then is able to pay that off because he gets tons and tons of views. But these guys are saying like that space is too expensive. There's too much capital costs up front to get there. And it's too competitive. And so the better thing to do is just use this bullshit generator engine to generate as much bullshit as possible, put it all out there. If stuff doesn't work, it's no loss to us because it doesn't cost us anything. And therefore, let's just get it out there until we find something that hits. And so now you have a whole bunch of people doing that. And so that's sort of like the motivating engine behind a lot of this is this idea that, well, we need to get attention. And the best way to get that attention is just to try as many things as possible and see what actually clicks. And then some of these guys are like teaching other people how to use AI Slop. And that's becoming like you just have this whole ecosystem of nonsense, which is all about trying to game the algorithm.
Yeah, the bit that I really like about this piece is the comparisons to a kind of brute force attack.
Yeah.
Which is obviously a kind of cybersecurity term. You'll know more about it than me, but like talk us through like why AI Slop is kind of like a brute force attack.
Right. I mean, it's just a question of like trying to get through, right? And so like a normal brute force attack is like the simplest version of a brute force attack is like trying to guess a password or something, right? And so you just will generate as many not random, but, passwords that might get into an account. Or if you're like looking for some other way into a website, you'll go through like scrape the entire thing and try and find like every possible way in. It's just like trying as many things as possible. It's not very sophisticated. It's, it's brute, like as it says on the tin. But this is that for the algorithm. And the thing that it kind of reminds me of in a lot of ways is when Google came along, there were other search engines in the 1990s and the rise of the web. And, none of the search engines were that good. And then Google sort of solved search by using this PageRank system. And they said, we have the system to actually make sure that the best stuff gets to the top. And the way it was originally done was based on how many links, with the idea that things would only get links if they were good. But pretty quickly, people figured out like, oh, here's an algorithm that we can game to our advantage. As more people go to Google to figure out where to go, if we can just get more links, and then became this whole crazy race and one-upping each other of search engine optimization, and often what's sometimes referred to as black hat methods, sort of sneaky methods to try and get around it. I mean, not a day goes by when I don't get emails from spammers asking to pay me to put links on TechDirt, because TechDirt has, a strong reputation within Google, and they'll offer me money to put links because they want those links to game the system.
But you could use that money to buy more time.
To buy more time. I thought you were going to say to buy the Twitter side.
Yeah, exactly. Either one will do.
I will say, every once in a while, when I'm really like in a cynical mood, I will respond to one of those guys and say, sure, it's $100 million. And usually they disappear after that. Occasionally I've had one come back and be like, no, what's the real number? And I'm like, $100 million. I'm not joking about this. Like, if I'm going to destroy the reputation and value of my site, I might as well get paid for real. Not whatever they're offering. They're always offering like $100 or something like that, But every system gets gamed. And it's just that in the past, like gaming social media algorithms was tricky, right? I mean, you had to put in the work, which is what they're saying with like the successful ones. Like, there's some inexpensive YouTube channels or Instagram things that have been successful, but the really successful ones are a little bit more produced. And so what the AI is enabling them to do is to like make it cheaper to game the system. So now everybody's doing that. And so to me, it sort of then becomes this arms race. We saw this with Google, and like at some point in the sort of mid to early 2000s, Google completely revamped their ranking algorithm because they knew that they had so much search spam, and they referred to it as search spam that was clogging up the results and making the experience worse. And so they completely redid the algorithm. Some companies that have sort of been built up around search spam got destroyed by it, and there was like the big shakeout. I'm guessing we're going to have to see something similar happen in the social media space.
Yeah.
And that there's got to be some way that Meta in particular, or YouTube to some extent, have to figure out how to deal with this stuff and whether or not people actually want this content. Because I think, like people are clicking on some of it, but then I think people are getting annoyed or like people are clicking on it because of the novelty and like, why am I seeing this nonsense?
Yeah. I mean, to kind of emphasize the point, and what the piece does really well is just emphasize the insanity of some of this content.
Oh yeah,
it's bonkers, isn't it? Like there's crazy stuff. Like there's like giraffes eating people and spawning on subway platforms. There's like it's bonkers. There's like grannies kissing llamas, and there's like heads appearing out of sharks. and models sitting on the street of markets being fed food by like market traders. There's a man with, I can't even explain how crazy it is.
Yeah.
But the weird thing is, it's kind of watchable.
Yes. Yes.
You kind of like can't look away, which obviously is why that content gets recommended to other people, because people are engaging with it to some degree. The thing that you talked about the kind of speed with which this has happened, Mike. It took years for people to figure out how to game Google and to an extent game other social platforms. The speed with which this has happened is, I think, what's shocking to me. And I wondered, like, if this is about the shift from social platforms that are based on following other people, and then the shift to people being grouped into cohorts or segments and just being served content. Because that shift means that AI slop can kind of proliferate, right? If this stuff had happened back in the day and you were following somebody on Twitter and they started sharing insane videos of a man, you know, a pizza dough man rolling out his own stomach, which is one of the ones in the in the 404 article. If somebody did that, you would unfollow them,
right?
Or you have the option to opt out of that. You don't have that option when you're on TikTok, or whether you're on Reels on Instagram, when you're just served this ongoing fire hose of posts. Is that what's changed?
I think, it gets to this issue of like how social media, for the most part, not entirely obviously, but for the most part, switched from this thing that it was the people that you followed, which then led to the rise of the algorithmic feed. And the algorithmic feed originally on social media was designed to sort of highlight the content from the people that you followed that would be most relevant to you, because otherwise it was just undifferentiated from people you follow, but you would miss stuff. And so it was an attempt to do that. The big shift then was to go beyond that to the sort of TikTok style For You page, which was beyond the stuff that you were directly following, having that algorithm try to pull in other stuff. And you can understand where there's like some element of value there, because like maybe you don't know about some other people. But then that has introduced this thing where now it's entirely the algorithm. And so where the shift is that it went from you saying who you want to follow being the signal for the kind of content you wanted, to now the algorithm beginning to take on not just that as the signal, but also what things are you watching, and then what might similar people want to watch, right? And so you have the concept of cohorts and everything like that. Whereas then you could opt out of following certain people. You can't opt out of your cohort that they sort of built for you. And that makes for a very different experience. And so I mentioned this to you before the podcast. I just yesterday, as we're recording this, I just interviewed Chris Hayes, who's the cable news journalist, a really interesting guy who just came out with this book called The Siren's Call, which is all about how our world is now based on attention and fighting for attention and business models built on attention. And I think all that plays into this. That interview will be on the Tech Dirt podcast soon. Maybe next week. We got to figure out which thing is rolling out when, but probably next week. But we had a really interesting discussion about this very thing and how algorithms have sort of taken over our lives. But, one of the things that we really tried to explore in that conversation, which I thought went pretty deep, was this idea that algorithms, like a lot of people right now want to blame the algorithms. And so I think it's really easy to look at this 404 story and say, like, this is the algorithm's fault, right? Like, algorithms change. And you sort of, I'm not saying you did that, but you were saying we've switched from this thing where it was the people you followed to the algorithms. And that leads some people to say, well, the answer to that then has to be like outlaw the algorithms or require you to have like a following feed or whatever. What we've seen is that users don't actually really like that. Like the pure following feed doesn't work as well as like a good algorithmic feed. The issue to me, and this is a lot of what I explored with Chris, is who controls the algorithm and for what purpose, not so much the existence of the algorithm themselves. And as I said, like the early point of the algorithms was good. It was to sort of highlight the content that would be more valuable to you and would be more useful to you, in the same way that like the success of Google early on was that it found the stuff that you were searching for that was better and more useful. It's just the problem is that then people start to game it, and then it becomes this ongoing back and forth. And that's where the problem then comes in, is whose incentives. You're dealing with a bunch of different incentives. You have the company's incentives, they're trying to make money. You have the people who are trying to game the system, they're trying to make money. And then you just have like little old you who just is trying to find interesting information. and you're just kind of like at the whims of all this other stuff. But if you had more control over that algorithm, right? So, I mean, you were saying before, like it was people you were following, that is still an algorithm, but it was one that you had control over, so you could remove someone.
Yeah.
And so the thing to me that I keep coming back to is like the real issue is who controls the algorithm and what their intent is. So when it's a company that's just trying to keep you engaged or trying to sell you stuff or trying to really sell your attention to advertisers, which is the way that most of these companies work right now, then their incentive is misaligned with you. That leads to the sort of enshittification. And so that fits in neatly with then a bunch of crazy people with access to these AI tools who can just pump out so much slop and just throw it into the system. Doesn't matter to them if it doesn't work, because all the incentives are messed up for the users.
Yeah. So what you're saying is kind of the algorithms as a term have been kind of associated with very centralized platforms.
Yes.
The ones that we've used for over a decade now. But what you're saying is actually if those algorithms are controlled by users and there are dials and levers and you can tweak them, then actually the algorithms themselves aren't the issue. That makes sense. The kind of issue that I was wondering about was like something you touched on is when is the course correction going to happen?
Yeah.
When our platform is going to limit the visibility of this kind of AI content, do you think they have incentives to do so? And where does labeling fit into this? Because I remember last year, around this time, Meta, which is where 404 Media focused much of its reporting in this piece, came out and said, we're going to label AI content. We're going to be able to detect.
They did, didn't they?
Yeah. They said, we've got this covered. Don't worry about the rise of AI content. We're going to detect the signals and we're going to be able to clearly label to users that this is AI-generated content. And we're going to work with other platforms and other partners, going to kind of embed ourselves into some of those existing initiatives. There's one called C2PA, which has got a lot of the platforms signed up. And the suggestion was that they were going to make it very easy for us to kind of opt out of that content or for that content to be kind of downgraded if it was less quality. It doesn't feel like that's happening.
No.
Do you think it will? It goes back to incentives.
Yeah, it's a good question, right? I mean, Mark Zuckerberg seems to have this view that like AI content is actually a good thing for the platform. He's making sort of a bet on that, and he sort of talked about that, right? And they've talked about building their own like AI generated users on social media that could interact, and we've talked about that in the past. And so I think his view, and therefore the company's view, is whatever keeps people coming back and using the platform is good. I do wonder how successful this could be long term, right? If you're just getting all of this garbage content, like sure, it is entertaining and amusing the first few times.
Yeah.
Like, check this shit out, basically.
Yeah.
But after a certain point, you have to be like, come on, why am I spending all my time looking at this when I could have more sort of realistic engagement somewhere else? And so I don't think this works long term. I sort of feel, if anything, the most likely scenario is that it follows the path that Google followed at the time where they suddenly decided, okay, we need to crack down on this. And then it becomes a big project and they come up with some system to crack down on it. And that only lasts for so long. I mean, I think a lot of people would argue probably correctly today, like Google is a bunch of garbage again. And the search engine optimizers have really won. And Google's made a lot of really bad decisions that have really sort of enshittified the results in some cases. It's a constant struggle and a constant battle, and you hope that they'll reach the point that they'll fix it. But I sort of feel that Meta in particular is going to have to realize that this kind of content is not a long-term sustainable success, especially as there are more and more alternatives that are sort of trying to take a different approach. And, one of the things that, and this is another thing that came up in the conversation that Chris and I had, which is that more and more people seem to be moving away from social media platforms like this to like group chats, where there is no algorithm and it's much more authentic and you're able to engage. And the feeling of fun that people had in the early MySpace, Facebook, Twitter years, people seem to be getting that feeling more from group chats than they are from global social media.
Yeah.
And it's because you have all this other stuff sort of crowding their way into social media. And I think there's going to have to be a reckoning of some sort by Meta with that.
Yeah. So you're right. It could be that users vote with their feet and say, actually, we want to spend more time elsewhere. But it could also be that regulation dictates and governments dictate actually what content should be labeled as AI slop or otherwise. And you found a couple of stories that relate to that this week, right?
Yeah, and so this was interesting where Spain announced that they were going to change the law so that there would be fining companies for platforms if they don't label AI generated content. And then there's another one saying China is doing the same thing. And so there is this part of me that thinks, as I often do, like if Western countries are doing the same thing that China is doing, maybe think about that for a second. It's funny, the article, the one on China is from Bloomberg, and it has the lead of China joined the EU and US in rolling out new regulations to control disinformation by requiring labeling of synthetic content online. And I was like, what are they talking about regarding the US? Because we don't have a regulation requiring that at all. So I think the reporting on this is a little bit confused. The Spain one, it was just from Reuters, is interesting, where they're saying they have this new bill that will impose massive fines on companies that use content generated by AI without properly labeling it as such. And you understand the thinking behind it. The Chinese approach, like, it's pretty clear that that law is designed to like stifle certain kinds of speech and use AI labeling as an excuse. The Spanish law, I think, is meant in good faith because they're scared about deepfakes. But I find these approaches also to be kind of silly and probably ineffective, in part because, like, where do you draw the line, right? I mean, everybody who's doing content creation these days uses AI tools in some form or another at some point. Okay, maybe not everyone, but a large percentage, right? So if you're writing and you're using like Grammarly to check your grammar, that is an AI tool. Do you need to label it that it told you had a typo? Or maybe it suggested, not ending a sentence in a preposition, right? Like, is that now AI generated? I think most people would say no, but then that raises the question of where is the line? But same thing with like images and videos. Like if you're touching up an image, if you're changing a video, if you're editing something, a lot of those tools are really AI. So where do you draw the line between what needs to be labeled and what doesn't? It feels like this is the kind of thing, this is my complaint with lots of regulations where it's like, okay, I see this thing, it is a problem, therefore let's just outlaw it without thinking through, like, does that really make sense? Is that really targeting the thing, or are you wiping out a whole bunch of other useful stuff with it?
Yeah, I think the line is pizza men rolling out their own stomach. I think that's for me.
Yeah. How do you write that into law, though?
Easy. No, I agree.
Just ask Ben. Ben is the decider.
Yeah. Once you see it, let me tell you that. I will say that I've been thinking a lot about like what the terms we use to refer to content on social media platforms in the age of AI slop. And I wonder if I'm going to use this opportunity to pitch you, Mike, a change in terminology. We've been using the word feed for as long as social media has been around.
Yeah.
I think it's time to end the use of feed. Now that we're consuming all this AI slop, I'm thinking we use the word trough. I think we can say, I'm going to the trough to consume my news. I'm going to open my app and go to my favorite trough. I think that's kind of befitting of where we're going with content on the internet, no? And we can all, like little pigs around a trough, just consume all the crazy images of pizza dough men and insane human seals and whatever else the AI generators have got for us.
Yeah. So Ben, just for you, I'm going to use an AI generator to generate a picture of pigs around a trough with social media content flowing through the trough. All right. So okay. I think that's going to work.
Yeah. Coming to a platform near you.
There you go.
Okay. Well, we went a bit mad there, Mike, but that's a fascinating story. Do go and read that 404 Media piece. We'll include it in the show notes. Our next story is one that we've touched on a lot since the start of the year. It's that big old question of what Meta's doing now that it's not fact-checking, right? And many of you listeners will have seen this week that the company has announced that it's rolling out its community notes function. It's decided that this is the way forward. It's starting to test it with around 200,000 people that have signed up. And it's some interesting details in there, Mike, in the press release this week that I wanted to kind of talk a bit about and get your thoughts on. Basically, the trial, the beta, is in 6 languages. It's only focused in the US, but it's covering 6 different languages. And what's going to happen is that people are going to start to see the community notes underneath particular posts, and they're going to be able to contribute to them. So if you're one of the 200,000 that signed up, you're going to be able to give your thoughts. Every community note is going to be 500 characters. It has to include a link. And the community notes will be kind of, I think, validated and rolled out over time, and then fact checking will be scaled back. That's what the blog post says. Really interestingly, at the very end of the press release, it says that the community notes is just in the US right now, but there's a plan for it to be all over the world. There's a global domination aspects to the community note. So it's just the US now, but there's clearly plans to do it beyond that. And I think there's a couple of really interesting points to this, Mike. That for me, there's the missed opportunity. And then there is the fact that they've somehow bungled this, that it's even worse than X's community notes. Okay. So I didn't realize this. Did you know that when community notes are applied on X, on Twitter, that actually it doesn't affect the distribution of that post? Did you know about this? Probably.
I think I had heard that. I think I kind of knew that, but
right.
I hadn't thought deeply about it.
Yeah, I mean, so Meta is copying X Twitter in a number of different ways. It's using the open source code that Twitter X has been putting out into the ether. It's taking a similar broad approach, but it's also deciding not to downrank posts that have community notes that contrast to the post itself. So, and I'm just thinking that's a clear missed opportunity. What is the point of getting people to input on a post and have the process that goes on behind the scenes on a community notes post, where you have people from different parts of the political spectrum inputting and potentially disagreeing, and then showing that community notes, if you're not going to then take a kind of view on the distribution? That seems like a mistake to me, or a decision at least the Meta is taking in the way it's doing community notes. So I take umbrage with that. Then there's also the fact that at least on X, there are community notes on ads. Some of the best community notes have been on random ads on the platform where it's calling out gambling companies for crazy claims, or really low quality e-commerce sites for the bonkers stuff that they sell. And you get some kind of funny, interesting community notes. They're the ones I've seen the most, at least. Meta is deciding not to do that on its ads. And clearly, there's a kind of commercial imperative or incentive to do that. But I'm like, that's another big missed opportunity. Like, at least if you're going to take a lot of the broad approach off Twitter and X, at least do the kind of coverage of community notes that Twitter has. So Casey Newton on Platform has written a bit about this as well this week. He says that it's a flawed approach. It's unclear how it's going to affect the experience of people on platforms like Instagram and WhatsApp and Facebook. But from the press release alone, you can see that there's not been as much thought put into this as there could have been.
Yeah. I mean, there's a question of how much thought went into all of this, right? I mean, the sort of the entire new approach, right? I mean, a lot of it really felt like Zuckerberg just sort of giving up on content moderation generally and just being sick of it and just not wanting to deal with it, and sort of saying, oh, people seem to like community notes, so let's just go with that. And in fact, just the fact that they're using the same code, which itself was based off of other open source code, is kind of interesting.
Yeah, this is what happens when I engage in ideas in good faith, Mike. You're right. This whole U-turn was never done for good reasons.
Yeah,
for better outcomes.
So yeah, and I don't know that necessarily. Like trying to parse out like why exactly are they doing it this way. I'm not sure that there's a good answer for that. I think also like just the fact that on X, the fact that community notes does apply to ads may be a legacy issue as well, and that ads on X were based on just taking a tweet and promoting it, and therefore, probably separating out that code, the community notes, originally Birdwatch code, from those tweets probably was more difficult than it was worth. And so people were like, let's just leave it. And then Elon Musk fired everybody anyway, so there's like nobody to actually do that. I think if it became a big enough issue, they would probably remove it too. Whereas Meta is much more of an ads-focused business. That is their business. And so I'm sure they were much more conscious of how that would play. And also their ad system is a little bit different and a little bit more evolved. And so I sort of understand probably the way that came down. But yeah, it does sort of give you a suggestion of like, this is not really about, the whole sort of embrace of community notes was Zuckerberg to say like, here's a solution. It's like power to the people nonsense, allows him to say something that is not entirely like we're turning off all of our moderation.
Yeah.
And then, sort of just hoping for the best. So, the fact that it's not floating back to the recommendation algorithm, interesting. I mean, it sort of goes into our first story and the AI Slop. Are there going to be community notes on the AI Slop? That'll be interesting to see what happens there. And so I could see there are arguments for having that play into the algorithm or not. One of the arguments against it is like, if it does impact the distribution algorithm, then you're giving more incentives for people to game the community notes. And community notes, again, is designed to be resistant to gaming. It's actually very clever in terms of the way it is set up and the sort of consensus mechanisms that are built into it. But that doesn't mean it's impossible to game. And so if you were to put it into the distribution part of the queue, that would create a larger attack surface that people would go after, and then you would see brute force attempts on the community notes feature.
Yeah, that's a theme already of the podcast. I actually went to look at what the eligibility criteria is for users on X who want to sign up as contributors to community notes. Meta have said you need to have an account for 6 months before you can join the program. Really, actually, if you go to the page on x.com that says become a part of the community of reviewers, you get this 404 cannot access. Basically, It's broken, right?
Yeah.
So
well, it does tell you the eligibility requirements, which are also the 6 months and a verified phone number. But then, wait a second. Oh, not anymore. So we checked this right before. You can check now, Ben, but you had me check right before we started recording, and I got the 404 page and an error. And I just went again to click to open it again because I wanted to read the exact error message. And now it is showing me a button to join community notes.
Oh, okay. So somebody's been listening into our pre-podcast preparation.
There was definitely an error before.
Okay.
Because you sent it to me and I clicked on it and I got the error message. And now I'm clicking. Okay, so here's what it is. If I go directly to the link that you sent me, I get the error message. It says, oops, something went wrong. Please try again later. If I follow the flow through reading the rules and then click to go, it does give me the chance to join community notes. And I'm actually going to click this button. I have no idea what is going to happen.
Do you know what it is, Mike? I think it's the twitter.com versus the x.com.
It could be.
So I think that there's a page on the community notes help center article that directs to a old URL that's twitter.com/flow/join birdwatch. And that clearly is an old URL.
Error. Well, I have now found out I do not qualify to join community notes.
Yeah, I thought that.
It does. It says, so there are 5 categories, and I have checks on 4 of them, but I am rejected because my phone carrier is not trusted.
Oh.
So I have no recent rules violations. I joined at least 6 months ago. I have a verified phone number, which I probably should remove. And I'm not associated with any other community notes account. But they do not trust my phone carrier.
Interesting.
And so I am blocked from joining community notes.
Well, we are all worse off for that because I'm sure you would have left some very good community notes. Sorry to say that this is embarrassing for you to be recorded, isn't it? A man of your standing being denied.
That's it is. I would expect nothing less. I would expect nothing less.
Well, fingers crossed.
I will say, Meta did pop up a thing inviting me to join their community notes.
Oh, you in?
And I clicked and I said okay, and then it said we'll let you know more, and I haven't heard anything more. So
you probably won't hear back if.
Yeah, I might not.
If Twitter's anything to go by,
I may get a notice that my phone is not trustworthy.
Yeah, indeed. Great. So they were our 2 kind of big stories that we selected. Obviously, we go a bit deeper on the chunky, interesting stories that we feel merit most discussion this week, Mike. But there's also a third story this week that we both touched on. Happy Online Safety Act Week.
Yes.
I don't know how you
celebrate.
So all you celebrate. Other regulatory acts are available. So on Monday, the OSA in the UK came into force.
I'm almost surprised we're allowed to talk, Ben. You're in the UK, and I don't know. Our podcast recording, does it violate the Online Safety Act?
Well, I mean, if a lot of the coverage is anything to go by this week, then you would think so. There's been a whole tranche of op-eds and reports about what the duties are of the OSA. we've touched on it a bunch of times, but this is the UK's long in the making regulation about platforms and intermediaries having to remove illegal content and reduce the risk of UK users on the platform. If they don't, you're liable for an £18 million fine or 10% of the global revenue, whatever's greater, that old chestnut that we've seen from other regulations. And we've touched on the OSA, Mike, in recent weeks because a number of smaller sites and forums and communities have started to talk about the fact that they're nervous about whether they are going to be caught up in the OSA. And we've seen a couple more this week. My favorite was a website called lemmy.zip. I don't know if you came across this. It's a Finnish news aggregator, kind of decentralized platform, quite kind of quirky, text only. And it's got a very long and quite scathing review of the OSA in which it says the Act does not meaningfully protect users. The Ofcom, the regulator of the Act, has demonstrated a lack of technical understanding when drafting and enforcing these rules. Very, very kind of pointed in its criticism of the Act. Continues a lot of what we've seen and read. But you found a really interesting counterpoint to that, Mike, which is a forum that you found that's taking a different tact, that's going a different way.
Yeah. And so, there are a number of different forums that are sort of reacting in different ways. So the one that I had seen was from Lobsters. .rs, the Lobsters part is .rs at the end. And it's sort of a techie focused forum. It's been around for a while. They had announced way back when that they were planning to block UK users. The founder of it just, explained that it would be effectively impossible. And then this week, in the lead up to this, they announced that they had disabled the geo-block. They were going to geo-block UK users, but they had disabled, and they wrote this very long and kind of interesting analysis of it, where, there are a few different interesting elements to it, to me, where they said, basically, we're going to do this in part because we don't think they're based somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. I think they're based in Oregon and, have no connection to the UK. And even though the Online Safety Act claims to cover every internet site that is accessible in the UK, part of what this guy is claiming is that they have no jurisdiction over me. And I doubt they're going to go after me because I'm a small forum. But if they do, I'm sort of willing to kind of fight the extraterritoriality aspect of this.
Okay.
But what's interesting is he notes that he reached out to Ofcom people multiple times trying to have a discussion with them. And he goes through all the reasons why it's effectively impossible to comply with, how the fines are ridiculous and disconnected from reality for this, which is a hobby forum that he just, runs on the side, is not making any money from it, but it's basically it's just not worth it. And there are too many questions and too many things to deal with. And so he just sort of gave up on the idea of geo-blocking it and just figures he's effectively going to take his chance. So there is this thing in here, which is that at one point, Ofcom replied and said, when we write to you to say that you're in breach, that is, you are in breach. Which, even though, this struck me as interesting because for years now, Ofcom has been running around, and I saw them say this directly at TrustCon, that they were not going to be this iron-fisted enforcer of the law, but that they wanted it to be this sort of back and forth. And if they thought you were not in compliance, they would reach out to you and have a conversation, and they would be the friendly regulator.
Yeah.
And yet this message, that even though it's kind of interesting that it's in this post where he's saying he's just going to ignore the law, they say, when we write to you to say that you're in breach, you are in breach. And basically saying, don't wait until you get that breach letter, and says, reach out to us, work with us. So they still have that a little bit work with us, but it's they're not shying away from the fact that they could try and fine you for millions of dollars. And so I thought it was a really interesting analysis at the same time as it's basically saying, look, we're not going to comply and we're just going to hope that they don't go after us.
Yeah. That's with a lot of the regulation that's come in, that's really the role that it plays, right? It's the kind of Damocles sword of that hangs over your head and that they can kind of dispatch at any moment. And the question will be, is Ofcom willing to let that sword go against a relatively small forum based in the northwest of the States? Probably not. So we're seeing more and more reporting of the implications of the Act, which is, I think, interesting because right now it feels like people still don't understand the implications of it and how it affects their access to the internet and communities that they've probably long been part of, such as the cycling forum and such as the kind of developer website we talked about in previous episodes.
And the hamster forum.
And the
hamster forum has shut down.
Oh, man.
And it says, we are sorry, the forum is closed down. You can now find us at Instagram. And so if the idea was, again, this is the point that I've raised a bunch of times, when you have these online regulations, they often give more power to the big companies that supposedly these regulations are designed to deal with. And so the hamster forum, a forum about hamsters, has shut down and moved to Instagram instead.
To listeners of Ctrl-Alt-Speech that are users of the forum and who are hearing about this now, I'm sorry.
Yes.
It's not great. But yeah, this is a theme that we are seeing. We won't figure out the Online Safety Act this week, Mike. We are going to talk about it again and again and again, I'm sure. I wanted to bring a story to you that is actually a kind of positive story, a story that I really liked. I almost sent it to you as soon as I read it. It's a Guardian article about how tech experts keep their children safe online.
Yeah.
And I love it because it says so much kind of sensible stuff about kids' safety and children's use of smartphones and internet devices. And in particular, it says a couple of things that I think are just so worth reading. If you're a parent, if you're not a parent, there's so much good stuff in this article. The crux of it is, and there's a few experts in there that both say the same thing. The crux of it is talking about the internet to your child early. And it's exactly what you've been saying in previous episodes of Ctrl-Alt-Speech. There is no simple way to protect kids on the internet. They're going to see inappropriate content from time to time, just like they fall over and graze their knee. And actually, the only way you can deal with it is by broaching with them early, working with them almost as adults and understanding that they know as much as you or sometimes more than you. It's just such a great article. I've very rarely seen anything like it. So what did you think about it?
Yeah, it is a fantastic article. I'm definitely going to use this and send it to people as well. It makes the point that I've been trying to make, except coming from an actual expert as opposed to me, some doofus on the internet, talking about, part of it is modeling good behavior for your kids, but also just letting them know, teaching them how to recognize that they may come across things that are dangerous and learning how to do it. And you can handhold with them. But the idea of trying to lock down the internet and make sure that they never see anything bad is not only impossible, it is ineffective because it also doesn't teach kids how to use things appropriately. And so there's a lot of be open to conversation, let kids know that they might come across stuff. If they have problems, to come talk to the parents, to have that open line of communication, which I think is the most important thing, and to just let them know that there are problematic things on the internet and teach them how to use it appropriately. Maybe work with them to see how they're playing stuff or, using different sites or different games or whatever it is, and make sure that you have that line of communication open is the most important thing. Because anything that you do that is try and cut them off or try and block them, or it even says kids are going to break the rules that you set for them. They're going to get around whatever blocks, but not freaking out about that and not coming down hard on them either, but figuring out what is it you're trying to do? Do you just want to watch something a little bit more? Let's talk about that. And this is something that we've done in our family as well. We do have time limits set on things, but we have the ability, and this comes up relatively frequently, where my kids will be using computers and they'll run out of time and they'll say hey, can I get another half an hour? I was in the middle of this or whatever. And we talk about it and figure out, it's usually okay.
Yeah.
And that's what it's giving this sort of common sense approach where the big thing is don't lock down everything. That's not effective, but have those open lines of communication. And it feels unsatisfactory for some people, but it's super important.
Yeah. And I'm not saying at all that it's not hard for parents to figure out how to set up particular platforms or set up their home Wi-Fi in a way that screens out most of the risk. You talked there about how you've done it in your home, and I've got friends who are parents and they spend a lot of time thinking about this. But this article is great for acknowledging that, but also saying that there are alternatives to it too. So
yeah,
great piece. Really recommend it. On to our last story, Mike, which is a little bit linked. It's about how teens use social media, and this one scared the hell out of us. And I'm gonna pose it to you directly. Okay, so I want your kind of honest answer. Are you a half swipe guy?
Well, I will say I did not discover the concept of half swiping until last night when I read this article. So I did not know this was a thing.
Got to explain it to us.
So apparently within Snapchat, there is the ability to half swipe, because apparently when you're, like reading a thing that was sent to you on Snapchat, the person who sent it to you can see whether or not you've looked at the content that they sent you.
Mm-hmm.
So Snapchat had implemented this feature, an affordance within the app, where if you don't fully swipe in, but you half swipe, you could see the message that was being sent to you without indicating back to them that you had seen it.
So no read receipts.
No read receipts. It was a sort of a way of getting around the read receipt, is you could do that. So people couldn't tell. But then they added this other like premium feature for some users. Like if you paid, you could see if someone was effectively doing the half swipe. And then you would have the information. You say, oh, they're not really committing to seeing my content. And so there's a lot of talk in here about how for teenagers who are in different social relationships or, interested in people romantically, how they're like freaking out about this. Like, are they half swiping or are they not replying to me? Do they not really like me if they only half swipe? All of this stuff that's just like all of this social dynamic stuff that is heightened by the affordances specifically of the app that the developers of these apps, I'm sure, haven't really thought through. I think about this in the context of there's all these talks now, even with Snapchat, there have been a bunch of lawsuits about specific affordances within the app and how they're sort of negligent in some form or another. But you can see how these kinds of things develop. They're not developed to like make a teenage girl have her heart broken because someone half swipes instead of full swipes. Or like they have this example where this one girl wanted to hang out with a boy and sent him a message, and he apparently half swiped, but she had the premium account so she could see that he half swiped, and he didn't reply for a whole hour. And then he did say he wanted to hang out. So they got to hang out, but she's still upset because he took an hour and he half swiped. And what does that mean? Maybe he doesn't really like me. And all this stuff, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like this is teenagers, right? Like this is always the way teenagers have been. And I talked about, I grew up in a time pre-internet effectively, and calling, we had to use the phone and call, and there was all this nervousness. And if their parents pick up, what do you say? And how do you address it? And all this kind of stuff. I think some of this is just the nature of like being a teenager.
Yeah.
But is sort of turned into this like big deal because of the app itself. Yeah. Right. And so to some extent, I think this is an exaggeration, but it's also kind of funny to see like how these things play out in the nature of a teenager who's sort of like going through the things that teenagers go through.
Yeah, it's so true. It's the importance of product design and how it contributes to interactions. It's not necessarily a safety thing, but you can see how that half swipe and that delay in somebody replying could lead to the kind of anxiety and stress that might lead to safety issues, to bullying, to people to take decisions that they don't want to take. So it's a lighthearted story that has a serious element to it. And it goes back to the story we touched on that was published in The Guardian about the importance of conversations and the importance of kind of talking to children and anyone, frankly, about the kind of different affordances of different platforms and technologies. There's no way out of it otherwise. And this has been a conversation that has been helpful for me, Mike, and hopefully will be one for listeners as well. That's a point I think we should wrap up this week. We've really enjoyed talking about this week's news. Thanks again, Mike, for joining. It's been great to chat to everyone. We'll see you next week. Don't forget that review. We'll see you in 7 days. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Ctrl-Alt-Speech. Subscribe now to get our weekly episodes as soon as they're released. If your company or organization is interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact us by visiting Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com. That's CTRL-Alt-Speech.com. This podcast is produced with financial support from the Future of Online Trust and Safety Fund, a fiscally sponsored multi-donor fund at global impact that supports charitable activities to build a more robust, capable, and inclusive trust and safety ecosystem.